Hello and welcome to another episode of Today You Learned. So today I want to talk to you about vCenter server and a script that I have created. So let's dive right in. So the script that I wanted to show you is right here under VMware and then the fingerprinter. So what I want to talk to you about is that the vCenter environment or VMware environment that's all around us. So most of company local networks are actually running on VMware ESXi being the hypervisors, vCenter server actually being the management interfaces for those virtualization layout. So I have created a fingerprinter tool as an easy way to enumerate and scan those environments. So I have that tool right here. So let me show you how that looks like. It of course has a help function. So it requires a subnet or a single IP address that you want to specify, and it will perform a multi-threaded scan, by default 64, and it can even check for the most common, the most bad or issues, vulnerabilities, so the most critical vulnerabilities based on the build number. So let me show you how it works by just presenting a single subnet, for example, like this one. So this is a subnet on which I know are several VMware products, I should actually say, and it immediately stands out. It's apparently the default is 128 in this case. So it detects all of the ESXi servers that are present, and I deliberately created several versions. So we have newer ones, 703, older ones, very old ones even. It also detects a VMware vCenter server, which is a pretty new one, but still vulnerable. And it's even able to detect and to enumerate VMware Workstation and maybe even Fusion. I haven't tested that yet. So it is a pretty broad type of scanner that is able to actually scan and find all the version numbers of all those systems. I pressed Ctrl C to specify a vulnerability parameter, so -v. So it will do exactly the same. There's actually no difference. But with the internal in the script, there's actually a check that if this build number is found, then this system might be vulnerable, is probably vulnerable to these exploits and vulnerabilities. So we have a CVE-2021, so arbitrary file upload resulting in remote code execution. Another one in when the vCenter plugin is enabled. Another one. These are all part of the vCenter server. So you can see that based on the IP address right here. So this is also a vulnerability for this vCenter version, namely the log4j one. Even the ESXi servers, so the newer ones, 19159, have no vulnerabilities, so these are already patched. But the older ones, like the 13 one, are actually vulnerable and can be exploited with these two CVEs together. So the list of exploits or vulnerability codes that are in the script is actually more or less limited to the ones that can be exploited and that are currently very problematic right now on these services. So the second part of the video I want to spend on exploiting actually a single vulnerability on the vCenter server, just to show you how easy it can be. For example, this one, we could have picked any one. This is also a very known one. But this one, the unauthenticated file upload resulting in remote code execution when something called CEIP is enabled, which is of course the customer experience improvement program, right? So let's take a look. Let's test if that machine is actually really vulnerable. It's a very simple check. I'll do it in Linux just to make it a bit easier using curl. So this is the IP address of our vCenter. So this is the vulnerable vCenter we have right here. And it actually is a vulnerability in one of the API calls, unauthenticated API calls, to collect telemetry data that can then be sent for the customer experience program and so on. So what we have here is in the site the send, we can actually provide a file name that will be created, and as a content of that file name we will try to send the string test2. If the system is vulnerable, we would get an HTTP. So let me maybe even show you how it looks like if we grab out those two. If this is shown, then the system is vulnerable, and of course with this, it will actually just sprint out vulnerable. If that is not the case, if there's a 404 or 401, then it is patched. Actually, I have an example of that one. This is a different IP address that is actually patched that way. So this is how to check if a system is vulnerable. To be fair, that file test1 is actually already made right now, but with just the content test2, that's not a big deal, not a big problem. So let's exploit it. I think right here, or maybe we should just open a new window like this. So let's set up a listener. I want to do it completely manually. So let's set up a listener to connect to a system that is also on the network, that is reachable. This system can be online, it doesn't really matter. So let's create a netcat connection, a listener to be specific. So a listener, L, verbose, so you have all the information, don't care about name conversion, and then on port 4444. So we are now listening on port 4444 for on this IP address, so we just have to make sure this is reachable. And the exploit that we want to do, if of course there's one in Kali itself or in Metasploit itself, but this is a manual one. So what we will have here, let me maybe even execute it first and then show you what is actually going on here. So it will actually perform something called a path traversal. So it will move back to the first folder with all these dots, and then inside folder etc cron.d, and then a random. So this random is actually always a different number. We can check the number that Linux has chosen right here, so we don't overwrite other exploits that might be there. This will be created and it will have the content *** as root, running as user root, a netcat connecting to the IP address on which we just created our listener on this port. And everything that is being connected or input using that netcat connection is actually being executed as a shell, a normal Linux shell. So let's see if this has worked. The stars mean that this will be run every single minute. So it might be that we have to wait a minute, but in this case we already waited long enough and we have our connection. So the first comment we usually want to do is who are we, right? So it looks like we are root, so we are now running as root on that vCenter. Right, we can even see the host name of that vCenter. We can see where we are in the root folder. If you want to see the traces of these exploits, we can actually go up or have a look on var log, this folder, and then analytics prod. This is actually where the files are being created that are not directory traversed. So we have our subfolder, this right here, being presented there. So let me copy paste it to make it a bit better. And as you can see, we have our test1 file that we used for testing purposes earlier, and we can see it right here that it has been created as root. So this entire system is actually running as root. I don't think I can use page arrow up right here, but I can copy paste to show you the contents of that file. Like this, we can see our test2 right here, but of course the actual exploit would be visible right here, right? We have our JSON file. The JSON is always added because that's how the upload is done, but every file that is created here is being added to the cron jobs, the cron daemon to be specific. So the last phase, so we have now done enumeration and exploitation. The last phase that we can do now is to have some persistence. We want to be able to, if the system is patched, still be able to log in. So what can we do for that? We can add a user, for example, pound. We give it a default shell, for example, bash, right? Of course, the command is not found because user add is apparently not a command available in this shell. That's not a big problem because we can actually manually feed it the entire path to the command. So this is where the command should be found. It's just not in the path. So let's do the same right now, like this. Okay, so is echo found? Echo is found, so I don't have to manually specify that. So now I want to change the password, but we're in a non-fully interactive shell right here. So I will have to change the password of the user pound like this. So he will now change the password of user pound into test1 minus, just in case there are some passwords compatibility checks that are being done or requirements. Like this, so it should be fine now. So let's finally change it. I don't think this comment will be found, right? Okay, so I'll have to specify its full path for that as well. So I will now change the configuration of the user pwned to make it part of the group sudo, so it is able to perform sudo, right? Okay, that should be enough. So let's verify. Let's see if we can log in as that user on that machine. Like this. So IP address of the vCenter. We want to log in as pwned. Okay. Typed in the password, and here we are. It does not have a root directory, but that's not a problem, of course. Or not a home directory, I should say. And now we are root. Okay, so we have now successfully backdoored. There are some interesting, because now vCenter is fully pwned, right? We have full root access to this vCenter, but we are not able to log into the web interface and mess around with the virtual machines. For that, we need some post-exploitation action, and that will be done in the next video within this channel and playlist. Keep learning.